A 2013 study at the University of Wisconsin-Madison confirmed that language has the power to alter our perceptions. Scientists believe that a single word can change our reality. And that word is yes. When we say yes to ourselves, we are allowing ourselves to alter our perception. When we say yes, we are allowing our minds to create a reality instead of allowing someone else to create it for us. I love the word yes. Yes, I love the sound of it. I am a say yes person. I walk through doors, and when I get on the other side, I make it happen. Now, of course, that can backfire because my 8-year-old once came to me and said, it's a little unfair that I can't get that Xbox 360. I heard you were a say yes person. Say yes can also be very difficult to say because you don't know exactly where the yes is going to take you, or you don't know what's going to come from the yes. When I was 12 years old, my father was the headmaster of my school, which was the worst thing ever. One morning we woke up and I was ready. I had my clothes on and my backpack, and he says, "We're not going to school today." And I say, "Yes." And he says, "Because we're going to march over the Brooklyn Bridge." And I say, not me. And I cry. And I hide in the closet, and I hide under a table. There's no way I'm going to march. Well, we're going to march to protest police brutality, and I believe in that cause, but there's no way I'm going because in my mind, in my 12-year-old mind, I believe that they're going to open the bridge, and we're going to fall in and die. And so I hide and I cry and I get dragged to this march, and there are 3,000 people, and my father's in the front of the lines because he's the headmaster and I'm next to him, and we're marching over the bridge, and we get to the other side, and there are policemen on horses, and there are dogs, and the police are in riot gear, and I'm crying and I'm afraid for my life, and all of a sudden in the back of the line someone starts singing, "We're fired up, we can't take no more. We're fired up, we can't take no more." And then my father starts singing, and I start singing, and all of a sudden, in that moment, I begin to feel a little better. The words sort of comfort me, and I think it was in that moment where I found my voice, where I decided I'm going to raise my voice. At Virginia Tech, where I was in college, I decided I was going to raise my voice when the university had not divested in apartheid. When there was no Black Studies program, I decided that I was going to say yes to a protest, and so I wrote a play. I had just seen Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It. And so I called my play Self-Discovery 101, You Gotta Have It. Of course, I stayed up all night until about 6 a.m. and I wrote the play. And I felt good, and I felt empowered, and I called my dad, and I said, "Dad, I wrote a play last night." And I was expecting him to say, "Congratulations, son, you're amazing." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do with it?" And of course, my response was, "Well, I'm going to produce it." I had never produced a play. But in that moment, decided I was going to say yes, and so I decided I was going to produce it, and I read a book about how to produce a play. But of course, I had no actors and I had no place to present the play. But a week later, I got a letter in the mail, and it said that I was going to be invited to a student leadership conference at the College of William and Mary. And so I look at the schedule of events and noticed that there are students coming from around the country, and there's no entertainment happening on Friday night of the conference. And so I called the director of the conference, Dr. Carol Hardy, may she rest in peace, and I say, "Dr. Hardy, my name is Kwame Alexander, and I'm a playwright at Virginia Tech." and I'd like to provide some entertainment for your Friday night leadership conference. And there's a pause. There's an uneasiness, and then she says, "How much?" And I say, "Huh?" You see, I had taken the dive, but I wasn't really fully expecting to have to swim. And she says, how much? And of course, I have never produced a play or promoted a play. And I say, I come up with the largest fee that I can think of, $500. And she says, okay. And so now I've got to hire actors, and I've got to actually direct the play, and I've never done it before, but I do it, and the play arrives at the College of William and Mary on that Friday, and the actors are there, and we're all excited, and the play gets staged, and there are 800 people in the auditorium. 800 students from around the United States, and we get a standing ovation, and at the end of the ovation, I'm feeling really good, and I say, we're gonna have a talk back with the director, and of course, I'm the director. I want more of that energy, and so people are asking me questions, and one young lady says, Mr. Alexander, is your play going on tour? Yes. I have no idea how to produce a tour. But in that moment, I felt like walking through that door was going to be something magical. I didn't know what that would be, so I said yes. And over the next 6 months, we took the play to Rutgers and Temple and James Madison, and I was feeling really good, and I fashioned myself the next Tennessee Williams or August Wilson. I was a playwright. And so I decided to continue to say yes, and the next semester, I took my scholarship money and my Pell Grant money, and I produced another play. I had written a play called 8 Minutes to 9 about a Muslim and a Christian, twin brothers who were at the hospital sitting on opposite sides of their mother's hospital bed, and she was dying, and it was called 8 Minutes to 9 because that was the moment when she passed. And the play was astounding. It was amazing in my mind. I had created this reality, and I staged it, and I used the money to rent out a theater, a 2,000-seat theater. And 3 people showed up. And 2 of them were mom and dad. And so what I hadn't realized is it's great to be able to say yes, but if you don't actually put in the work, then the yes is just a word. You see, the word creates the perception, but the work creates the reality. The inner dialogue you have with yourself saying yes is a way for you to prepare yourself for the reality, but you have to be able to put in the work. And so after college, I decided to put in the work. I decided I was going to publish my own book. And so I did, and I was going to be a writer, and I had 1,000 copies in my living room on Columbia Pike in Arlington, Virginia, and I realized from that theater mishap that I needed to now promote. I needed to now market, and so I had read an article about Stephen King, and Stephen King had just signed a mega $1 million book deal, and he had been on a motorcycle tour across the United States. And of course, this was my thing. I was going to produce a tour. But I didn't have any money. And I certainly couldn't ride a motorcycle. But somehow I ended up in Nashville and Chicago and Chapel Hill. And I sold a few books here and there. And at the last stop, a place called Los Angeles, I showed up at a church where I had been invited to sign books in the gift shop, and I had 160 books, and I'm sitting in the pews in the congregation, and at the end of the sermon, the pastor says, we have a poet here today, and we'd like Mr. Alexander, if you're interested, to come up and share a poem. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. I write love poems, many of them suggestive. The thing about saying yes is you got to be prepared to say that yes, even when you're uncomfortable. And so I said yes, and I go up into the pulpit, and I stare out into a sea of beautiful black women in church hats, and I say at the top of my lungs, I have never been a slave, yet I know I am whipped. Yeah. I have never been to Canada, yet I want to cross your border. I have never traveled underground, yet the night knows my journey. If I were a poet in love, I'd say that with you, I have found that new place where romance is just a beginning and freedom is our end. And it's complete silence. And then a woman in the back of the church says, amen, hallelujah. I sold 160 books. I believe that when we say yes, we are uttering the most profound prayer ever. The word amen means so let it be, or truly, or yes. And so over the next few years, I became obsessed with yes. I became obsessed. And the yeses were good. I mean, the yeses got me married to a beautiful and a brilliant woman. The yeses took me on cultural exchange to Ghana and Brazil. The yeses got me writing on a children's television show. But the yeses also almost ended me up in court. And the yes, they also almost got my house foreclosed. So here's the thing I realize is that sometimes when you say yes to yourself, you have to say no to someone else. The yeses are really easy when you know the outcome. The yeses become very difficult when you don't know what's on the other side of that door. So I said yes when I got invited to read poetry at a conference of English teachers in 2008. And I said yes when at this conference the organizers asked me to come to a luncheon and read love poems. And I said yes when I arrived at this luncheon and there were first grade teachers and all I wrote were suggestive love poems. Lips like yours ought to be worshiped. See, I ain't never been too religious, but you can baptize me anytime. And I said yes when an editor walked up to me and said, Kwame, I love the style of your poetry. I love your poems. Have you ever thought about writing a book for young people, for teenagers? And I had never thought about that, but my answer was yes. And she said, well, why don't you send me what you have? But I didn't have anything. And so I went to my favorite place because here's the thing I knew. I knew that I had studied poetry at Virginia Tech with Nikki Giovanni. I had found my voice on that bridge in Brooklyn, New York. I had a teenage daughter in my house. I knew young people so well. My teenage daughter came home one day and she said, Dad, I'm ready to go to the movies with a boy. Now, that was really hard to say yes to. But I did. I said yes when you're 30. And my wife said, well, Kwame, you're going to have to do something to deal with it. And I did the thing I do when I'm trying to understand the woes and the wonders of the world. I wrote a poem about it. 10 reasons why fathers cry at night. 1, because 15-year-olds don't like park swings or long walks anymore unless you're in the mall. 2, because holding her hand is forbidden and kisses are lethal. 3, because school was fine, her day was fine, and yes, she's fine, so why is she weeping? 4, because you want to help, but you can't read minds. 5, because she's in love, and that's cute until you find his note asking her to prove it. 6, because she didn't prove it. 7, because next week she's in love again, and this time it's real. She says her heart is heavy. 8, because she yearns to take long walks in the park with him. 9, because you remember the myriad woes and wonders of spring desire. And 10, because with trepidation and thrill, you watch your teenage daughter who suddenly wants to swing all by herself. And so I felt completely prepared to write this book for young people because I had had a plethora of experience. And so I went to my favorite writing place, a place called Panera Bread. And I sat in my favorite chair next to the fireplace, and I ordered my favorite dish, the mac and cheese, and I got the lemonade, no ice, and I started writing, and I had written 50 pages of a book, and it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I felt like it was the best thing I'd ever written, and I sent it to this editor, and she sent me an email back, and the email said, "Dear Kwame, thank you so much for writing this book. Unfortunately, it's not that good, and so we aren't going to publish it." And so I went back to Panera Bread and I rewrote it, and now the book was 100 pages, and I felt like it was the best thing I'd ever written, and I sent it back to her, and she sent me an email, and this time she said, "Kwame, thank you for the work you've done for rewriting it. Unfortunately, it's still not that good, and so we aren't going to publish it." And so I went back to Panera Bread and I rewrote it one more time, and now the book was 200 pages, and it was a novel, and it was a novel about two 12-year-old boys, and it was a novel told through poems, and if there was anything I knew poetry like the back of my hand, and I sent it back to her, and she sent me an email, y'all, and this time the email said, "Dear Kwame, please stop sending me this book." And so I don't understand this because I'm a say yes person, but I'm being told no, and I don't get it because this is the best thing I've ever written. And so I go back one more time and I rewrite it, and now the book is 238 pages. I send it to her, but I send it to 18 other people. And I get 19 lovely emails, y'all. And the emails all say, "Dear Kwame, thank you so much for writing this book. Unfortunately, it's not that good. You've written a book about basketball, and girls don't read books about sports. You've written a book about basketball, and you use poetry to tell the story, and boys don't read poetry. Basketball and poetry do not go together. Your book will never sell, and so we aren't going to publish it." And so then I'm saying, okay, 22 plus people are telling me, no, this book is no good. They can't all be delusional. It's got to be me. And so I did what any sane, logical thinking person would do. I gave up. It made sense. I looked for the nearest exit sign, and I walked out the door because I didn't feel like I deserved to be in that room anymore. And then I woke up the next morning. My wife reminded me, "Kwame, you're a say yes person. How do you say yes to yourself and not let other people's no's define who you are?" And so in that moment, I decided to say yes, and I decided to publish the book myself. And a week later, I get an email. And the email is from a woman by the name of Margaret Ramo, and she says, "Dear Kwame, I work at a company called Houghton Mifflin Harcourt in Boston. I read your novel. I loved your novel. Everyone on my team loved your novel, and we would be honored to publish it." And so the book got published. And I began to travel around the country and around the world reading poems from the book. And I ended up in places like Shanghai and Singapore. And I read the same poems each time because I knew these would be the poems that would allow young people to become engaged with the story. If my hair were a tree, I'd climb it. I'd kneel down beneath and enshrine it. I'd treat it like gold and then mine it. Each day before school, I unwind it. And right before games, I entwine it. These locks on my head, I designed it. And one last thing, if you don't mind it, that bet you just made, I decline it. And then you hear the kids in the audience go, "Oh!" And so kids are buying the books, and now librarians are reading it too because their students are requesting it. And then I see on Twitter one day, there's a teacher in Dallas, and she said that she had to put her copies of this novel behind lock and key because boys were stealing them and then raffling them off to girls to read. And I said, yes, and no, and yes, and no, that's wrong. And so I flew down to Dallas, Texas to meet these students in this librarian, and I show up, and they're in the library, and I walk in, and I'm reciting poems to them, and they're all excited to meet me, and then we're about to leave, the bell rings, and I say, "Hold on." And I unveil 8 boxes of the book. And every student gets one. And the kids are like, they're thinking like there's gold in between these books. And of course, we know that in between the pages of a book are treasures that allow kids to be able to see what's possible, to say yes to what's possible in their life. And I felt like Oprah, you'll get a book, and you'll get a book, and you'll get a book. And for me, That was it. The yes worked. That was it. Until February the 2nd, 2015. And I'm sitting in my basement in Herndon, Virginia. And it's midnight. And my wife says, Kwame, I'm going to sleep. And I say, okay, Steph, but I'm going to stay up for a little while. And then it's about 1:30, and so I get hungry, so I make some pancakes. And then about 2:30, I get thirsty, so I drink a root beer. And then about 3:30, I'm bored, so I watch reruns of The Walking Dead. And then about 5 o'clock, I say, okay, this is it. And so about 6 a.m., I go upstairs, I get into bed. And at 7:16 a.m., my phone rings. And I look at the phone, and it says, no caller ID. My wife jumps up in bed and she says, answer it. And so I answer the phone, hello? Yes, this is Kwame Alexander. And the caller says, Kwame, before I continue, if you've heard of the Oscars or the Grammys, there's an award for children's book authors. It's called the Newbery. It's like the Oscars or the Grammys. And so this guy says, Kwame, I'm calling from the 2015 John Newbery Medal Committee. And all I can think to myself is, oh, snap. And he says, Kwame, I'm calling to tell you that your novel, The Crossover, and all I could think is, what if I had given up after no number 1 or number 4 or number 11 or number 19 or number 22? And he says, Kwame, I'm calling to tell you that your book, The Crossover, is the recipient of the 2015 John Newbery Medal for the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. And I hear nothing else he says, because in my left ear, my wife says, oh my gosh! And so our daughter comes into the room and she's like, what's all the commotion for? And she's like, why are you and mommy so happy? And why are you dancing? And why are you crying? And we say, Daddy just won the Newbery. And she says, yay! Now can you make my French toast, please? Here's what I know. The no's are a part of life. I think we got to learn to embrace the no's. They're going to happen. It's the way the universe works. But here's the cool thing. Once all the no's come to the party and they go home and they're exhausted, what's left? The yes. And how many yeses do you need? You just need one. Thank you.